Hi there. This video will show how to do calibration from scratch in Scantheus using a color checker 24 chart. There's a separate video for calibration using a Faggy chart. Now, in addition to color calibration, since we're doing it from scratch, we're also going to do a light correction and as a bonus, focus. Now, I'm not running on a copybook scanner. See down here in the bottom left, there's usually some cradle controls. I just have a copybook camera on a rig, and I'm just using a mat here without any cradle, with the glass and everything. So we're going to do an initial scan here, and this is a warning message that comes up when your scanner is not calibrated. It checks the camera settings and detects whether it's been calibrated or not and gives you that warning. So if you see this warning come up when you start scanning a book, you need calibration. So our scanned image pops up in the thumbnail, but let's go into the camera expander here, and this is where you will find the calibration. So there's only 7 camera settings that are affected by calibration. That's exposure, RGB gain, RGB offset, that is gain has red, green, and blue components, and offset has red, green, and blue components. The gain affects the white patch or the lightest patch. The offset affects the black patch. I'm going to open up image filters here, and we'll talk about them a little more when we go into calibration. And you go into calibration via this button up here, so it expands out, creates a calibration window area, which pushes down the camera settings down here as I'm scrolling down to show that. In calibration, we want to make sure that none of these image filters are on. So your settings are saved off for the book that you're scanning when you go into calibration. But while you're in calibration, make sure these filters are turned off because we want to calibrate using a raw image. The calibration area has 2 sections, light correction and color calibration. Now, light correction you only have to run once unless the lighting situation around your scanner changes, like the scanner light itself is replaced, you replace a light somewhere near the scanner. Anything that affects your environment in that way will require light correction to be run again. Otherwise, you run it once, leave it alone. Now, light correction requires a white sheet that comes with the scanner. And you notice how even the white of the sheet is. I've run light correction earlier on this, and I've also bumped up exposure, and that's what that pink area, this pink blob in the center is. It's called a hot spot. Now I'm going to reset light correction. You're going to see the difference between a light corrected situation and a non-light corrected. So you see the shadows around the edge there, and the hot spot now is a white area. You notice when I did the reset of the light correction, it created 2 color droppers there. And light correction works off of the hottest spot there. And the first thing it does is adjust exposure. So each of the RGB settings of that hot spot are 245 or below, because the light correction algorithm requires that to balance out the white of the camera. So you notice there's a little log window there that reports what it's doing with exposure. Then it kicks off light correction. It asks the paper to be removed. I'm going to keep it on here for a moment to show how a light corrected camera looks. So see, there's no shadows. Looks good. Now I'm going to do another bonus step here. We're going to do a focus that you can actually run at any time, but it's kind of like light correction. You don't need to run it very often unless you see, in this case, your images seem to get a little blurry. That's what this button is over on the left. You see a focus button, and I'm going to use a sheet that comes with the scanner, with the line sheet. And the important thing is that when you're scanning, you press your material against the glass, because that's where your focus distance is going to be. I don't have a glass here. I'm just doing it flat on the mat, but that's important that you do your focus with this sheet pressed against the glass, and when you do your scanning, press it against the glass so they're both at the same point. All right, time for color calibration. Let's get the chart down here. You need the grayscale patches along the bottom and as even as possible. A little bit of angle's okay. Then we're going to go up here and adjust this user define and set it to color checker 24. And what that does is it immediately goes and looks for the grayscale patches in the live view. So if you don't see these, your exposure may be too low. You might need to bump it up. I'm gonna reduce exposure by 10. You'll see it loses those droppers. So if you don't see them, it's not going to be able to calibrate. So I'm going to bump it back up, put exposure back to 55. We're ready to run. One more thing that's helpful is to do an isolate of the chart. That automatically sets up the live view to just capture the chart. It'll help the scans be smaller images, which help the analysis of the color work faster. So let's kick off calibration. Again, you'll see the log window show exactly what it's doing. First, it starts messing with exposure. Then it starts adjusting the gain. You can see down in the bottom right there, exposure ticking around, changing. It's 63. Now it'll switch into adjusting the red, green, and blue of the gain, trying to get that patch to 201 for each of those values. Then it will switch to the black patch and adjust the offset to get the red, green, and blue of the offset of the black patch to 50. So what it's doing, it's taking a scan and analyzing that patch every time, and then adjusting the setting as needed to get to the target area. Our calibration is successful. So it took 54 seconds, 18 scans, and it always does a scan at the very end of calibration. So you can take a look at the image here. We're going to look at the black patch. If you look at the bottom left, it shows the RGB value of the patch, or the area that we're highlighting there. Our target there is 50. Our target for that patch is 201. Now, if we're within 3 of the target value, so 3 less or 3 more, we're calibrated. Here's the settings. It changed. You notice, if you remember, our gain was 1,000, and it bumped them up to get calibrated. Now, a better way to check your scan is this check scan. And what that does is it does a scan, and then it analyzes those two patches and tells you pass or fail. So because they're within 3, the white's a little high there by 1, but it's still within the margin of error of 3. Now, you'll notice I did multiple scans there, and it changes slightly from scan to scan, especially the black patch. So keep that in mind, that you're not going to have an exact value each time. So I'm going to do an optional extra step here to see if I can get these patches a little closer to the target value. So first I'm going to try to go for the white patch here, and I adjusted the gain of all 3 down by 10 to see if I can get the white down to 201 instead of the 202 that it was on. Now you see that the green has dropped down nicely to 201, but the red and the blue are still up 1. The black patch, a little low on red, so I'm going to bump him up a little bit. So you can tweak each of these camera values to try to get the red, green, and blue exactly on target. Like I said, each check scan will be a little different, but I know the automated process is not always going to get you exactly to your target value, but if you do a little tweaking afterwards, you can get very close, or a much more accurate color. If you notice, the black patch started failing on my check scans, and that's because I adjust the gain down in order to get the gray patch in line. Well, that affects all the colors, so I had to go back to offset and bump it up in order to get it back into spec. But now both patches are looking good, and I have a calibrated scanner. Now again, that step I did there at the end, manually adjusting it, that's optional if you want to get 0 in. If not, otherwise you're calibrated. So when you close calibration up here, it'll prompt you and say, do you want to save it as the default configuration? Yes, you do, because that gives you the benefit of when you do a new config, it will load those camera settings in from your calibration, so you don't lose it and have to run calibration again.